Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with a presentation that considers whether we can assess the effectiveness of Nazi propaganda and the effectiveness of the Nazis' control over the German people. Now, I have made other presentations on propaganda and on the Nazis' police state. I will do one on the degree of opposition too. But I think this presentation still helps with the kind of questions you see on the left-hand side of this slide, and the first question on the right-hand side, even though its main focus is really on those last two C questions, and the effectiveness of the Nazis' methods. And I think I have something very important to say about assessing effectiveness. Evaluating the effects of propaganda is notoriously difficult. Studies of propaganda conclude that whilst it's quite successful in reinforcing already held views, and maybe persuading people who are already beginning to come round to your way of thinking, it's far less successful in converting doubters, and decidedly unsuccessful in converting those who are hostile to your way of thinking. Whilst as far as compliance is concerned, it's difficult to tease out the impact of propaganda from that of fear. But we can still make some conclusions. There was little opposition from the German people, and those successful policies and military victories before 1941 undoubtedly played their part. Nazi propaganda must have played its part too. And even when faith in the party was shattered with the setbacks from 1941 onwards, faith in Hitler was maintained almost to the very end. However, the degree to which people were converted to Nazism was probably only minimal, though it did enough to help keep people compliant. But we should also consider the fact that after the fall of the Third Reich, Germans quickly reverted to the values of liberal democracy. Now, propaganda targeted the majority of the population, those that actually supported the Nazis, or at least were prepared to accept them, those that were too scared to oppose them, and so in that sense the SS, SD, Gestapo were having an impact, and those who were apathetic. Propaganda at least kept them quiet, whereas the SS, SD, Gestapo targeted those that they knew would not be taken in by the propaganda and would oppose the Nazis because of their already held convictions, the likes of communists, socialists and trade unionists. There was also a generational factor. Whereas propaganda was more likely to capture the hearts and minds of the younger generations, the older generations already had alternatives to compare the Nazis to, and so would be harder to convert. So there was also a need for the police state, even terror, to force their acceptance. Across Germany, anyone openly showing opposition to the regime or found to be secretly plotting against it would face the full power of the Nazi state. In the aftermath of the Reichstag fire at the end of February 1933, the Nazis moved to ruthlessly deal with communists. And after that initial move, social democrats and trade unionists were targeted. Anyone who posed a threat to the regime. Himmler's order was to arrest all those persons who have been particularly active in politics. But most Germans were safe from the Nazis, so long as they behaved themselves. The Nazis' targets were its political enemies, including church leaders who voiced opposition, racially defined enemies, Jews and Gypsies, and so-called social deviants, such as homosexuals, beggars, and habitual criminals. And the fact that most Germans were in fact quite safe from the arms of the Gestapo or the SS, the courts or the concentration camps, raises an important point. For when comparing the roles and the impact of propaganda and the SS, SD, Gestapo, it's really important to understand that they had different targets. And by the way, the picture on this slide is of Dachau, the Nazis' first concentration camp. However, there is another factor that we should not overlook. For many Germans, the Nazis and their policies were popular. They had, after all, voted for them in their millions. Hitler was incredibly popular. He had given the unemployed jobs, as he had promised to do, and the Olympic Games had made Germans proud. And what he was doing to the hated Treaty of Versailles was very popular. Rebuilding the German army, remilitarizing the Rhineland, and achieving Anschluss with Austria took Hitler's popularity to new heights. Germans felt that their country was a great power again after the humiliations of the First World War and the hated Treaty of Versailles. Then, when Germany defeated France, well, Hitler became the most popular politician amongst his own people on the planet. Also, many Germans who hadn't voted for the Nazis, but whose lives had improved, accepted the regime. They were prepared to tolerate the loss of political freedom and ignore the terror, so long as it didn't affect them, in return for work, foreign policy success, and a strong government. Small businessmen who were helped by the Nazis supported the regime. Large businesses benefited from the rearmament program. Workers were grateful to have jobs, and this won the support of their wives too. They could now put food on the table, while farmers benefited from Nazi policies too. So, although the plebiscites can be questioned and the depth of support for Nazism is in doubt, there is evidence to suggest that Nazi rule wasn't solely a result of the SS, SD, Gestapo. Far from it. I hope that gets you thinking. But sometimes you simply cannot reach definitive conclusions, and the examiners know that. So don't feel you have to, but do explain why you can't. It's very important to be aware of that. But now it's time for me to thank you for listening. Do subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and tell your friends about it. Make me feel useful. Good luck with your studies. Cheers.